and here on Zoom, I assume. And let's see who we might have. You know, we're trying to do a number of people who are from, like Rod, the West Coast, East Coast. I know we still could do Zoom at the hall, but I think it's better if we have, you know, people in person there. Can't quite pay to fly them in. So, you know, more local people. So who we might have next time is Marsha Smith, space policy expert, and NASA is just
can't hear you, Barb.
Can't hear me?
Your volume suddenly cut by about 80%.
Really? Okay.
There you go.
So we may, for our next meeting, we may have Marsha Smith, who's a space policy expert and a good friend of Leonard and mine, as is Rod. She worked for the Congressional Research Service for years and said once she left there, she had a lot to say. And she's been the space policy expert and has a website about that for, you know, I don't know what, 6 years or so.
Long time.
And when she was working for the Congressional Research Service, which is, you know, backs up all the senators and Congress people, and I guess the president, no, maybe not the president. Yeah, okay. So she was a Soviet space program expert. And then, you know, she's an expert in a lot of other areas too, but that was her specialty back then, right?
Right.
Yeah. So let's see. Does anyone else have any other announcements? No? Okay. One thing. So I'm not sure I heard, Susie, can we do a parade entry in the 4th of July parade, or?
She's waiting for her.
You're waiting to hear?
From Boulder County.
Okay. Okay, good. And is Jan on here?
She is as an attendant. I see her.
Okay. Yeah, Jan, when did the bears come out? That's an important little piece of information, you know. Is she there? Or maybe she can tell us later. The other thing I wanted to just let you local people know is the Mountain Messenger, the editor, is going on a trip, so John and I don't have to get our article in till the end of the month, and so it won't be out till about the 5th. But just so you know, if you're looking for it in your mailbox. And I think that's my announcements here. So what we're going to do is Leonard's going to do about 5 minutes or so. 2 minutes on
It's gonna go fast.
Space missions updates.
Yeah,
and
things to
then we
look
have,
for in the next couple of days, a week.
And then Tommy, I think is, yeah, Tommy's on there. Yeah, he's waving. He's going to, he sent me in an article about the latest on this odd looking possible spaceship or, oops, uh-oh, something happened to her. Oh, no, wait, maybe John's
screen
sharing. Okay,
sharing.
good. Okay. I think you pronounce it
Oumuamua. Oumuamua.
So yeah, he's going to give us a little 5-minute update on that. And then I think John Williams might show us a few of his astrophotography shots, and then we'll go to Rod. So
We'll be expeditious.
So Leonard, here you go.
Okay. Let's see. Yeah, John, can you start those things again? One of these days I'll figure out how to do my own.
Hold on.
I'll
What
get
the
that.
heck? Yeah, just a sec.
Okay.
It was out of order. It's out of order.
Is anybody getting screen freezes but me? Or is it just me? Looks like it's just me. Okay.
All right.
John, just so you know, I'm still getting them. So if I go silent here and there during my talk, it's because I went, and I'll just wait it out.
That was a pretty good impression. I like that.
Yeah, lots of practice.
Well,
Rod,
you
for
had me going the other day.
Just
All
Rod,
right.
for when your talk, when you're doing your talk, are you okay with people asking
You froze
questions?
again.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Yeah. Are you okay with people asking questions during your talk, or would you rather they wait till the end?
If folks don't mind keeping track, I got a lot to get through, and I'll try and keep it as brief and breezy as possible. But I like doing them at the end, just because otherwise I'll get lost in the question and we won't get back to the talk.
Okay, sounds great.
It's a bad habit I've got. It's like, oh, I've got 3 answers for that.
Okay.
Should be up for you, right?
I see a white bar.
Well, hold on a second.
Black on the top and white on the bottom.
Maybe I'm having issues tonight.
Huh.
Hold on 2 seconds.
Yeah, we rarely have issues.
Well,
Show
it's
our beautiful faces.
my I was doing some uploads to the cloud, so maybe that's in the way.
Oh, that's
Steve, you okay there?
Yeah, your slides came up for a couple of seconds and then it went to that white bar.
All right. Was it still a white bar?
no. Now we're back.
No,
to
we got
the,
nothing now.
Now we're back to the
Okay.
Partridge Family layout.
Checking. All right, just checking.
Night,
Um,
John.
Can you pause your uploads?
Yeah, I did.
Oh,
I'm still. All right,
Oh,
so
This is
good
our
idea. I'll do that
family.
too.
here we go.
While you're doing that, I just wanted to say, SkyWatchers on Zoom here, all of you have helped us get through this whole last year. You're like family to us, and we love you all. But also, it helped us understand how long a month is, because most of the time we're meeting every month.
Yeah, it was up for a minute there.
No, that was not mine. That was something else.
That was John's.
Okay.
But
So Leonard, have you noticed the hey, it's Friday, it must be shower day thing yet?
Hey, Rod, I got a question for you. You said it would
Sure.
be, did you guys have to winterize the boat up there?
Oh, I didn't have the boat up there. I'm down in Southern California in San Diego. That was where my parents lived.
Oh, I just didn't know if we had a boat.
Nah, none of us were hardy enough for a boat up there. If you don't have an oil,
I don't know what's going on. It's flashing on me, like my monitor's gone.
It looks like
wonky.
it's working
I
now.
think that's the first one.
You want to go
So
ahead
we
now?
can go ahead. And I'll just say what this was one of the earlier, well, this wasn't too early, but the rover has all these mechanisms underneath it. And that one is what they call, what did I say? I don't remember what it's just like a drain pan or something, a bed pan. And it fell off, or it's ejected and falls on the surface, and then exposed some drilling equipment. So the rover's really been doing very well. This is Perseverance. We got actually NASA's got 3 active spacecraft on Mars. People don't kind of put them together, but Curiosity is doing really well at Gale Crater, and Insight is a static lander, but it's still operating and doing some things, although they've had some issues with a thermal probe, and they've been fooling with that thing for a couple of years now. But anyway, things are going good for NASA and Mars.
No
And I don't know.
picture.
Yeah,
What's
we
that?
don't see John, we're not seeing the picture. It's
Is there?
that little blue circly thing.
He knows he's working on it.
Let's see. What,
We can forget it. Get on with
Yeah.
the other people.
yeah, Leonard only had
I only
couple of
had like
slides here.
4 or something.
But
I can just go ahead, and as long as we got everybody else's, I don't really care. You know, the only other thing that I was going to talk about was a little bit, and maybe Bob Glenn can pipe in here on anything. And I'm skimping through all kinds of things that are happening, but I watch Elon Musk again. He's got a Starship, a new one out there in Texas, and he's going to try to do a static fire probably tomorrow of the engines, and then he's going to attempt to fly that thing again. These are all different rockets. The last one, it did everything it was supposed to do, but it blew up after it landed and sat there for a while. But it's pretty interesting. He's really cranking these things out. He's got a number of them in the production shed, so he's rolling these things out. So we'll see. I'd keep an eye on Elon Musk and SpaceX and their Starship. And it's pretty spacey engineering. It looks like a real rocket from Buck Rogers days almost. What else? The SLS is Space Launch System. This is the NASA big booster that's going to be powering the Orion spacecraft to the moon. Had a successful engine test, this core stage, and that was a big plus for NASA. Now they got to figure out exactly when the Artemis 1 mission would ever fly on top of that thing. It used to be November. Most likely that's going to be delayed till December or January of next year. But it was a big success. That thing roared for 8+ minutes. So it mimicked what it has to do to carry this Orion space capsule. So that was a very successful thing. What else did I have in there? I can't remember.
Let's see.
Okay, there we go. That was
You
something.
want to run through this?
You can just go to the next one if you can.
It's something's going on with my computer. It keeps flashing off like it's,
Okay. Well,
but it's not resource. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, so sorry guys.
there's Mars. It's okay. No problem.
So John, do you think you'll be able to do the other ones? Because I have Rod's talk here. If we need to
Rod,
share it from here.
Tommy
should
can
be
do
able to-
his own.
I've got my own. I can do mine when the time comes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so can Rod. So
Yeah.
I won't do mine, and we'll be good. I thought turning off my video would work, and I've shut down everything that's going on, and nothing. So
Yeah, that's interesting, John.
I think the
'cause
only
that-
other thing I was going to mention was Curiosity. It's pretty cool. It's really got some spectacular, pictures coming back from. It's sitting in front of a cliff, and the layering on that cliff is really fascinating. And they're just taking lots of images of that cliff face, because it's almost like tree rings. I mean, you're going back in time and trying to understand exactly what took place there at Gale Crater. Anyway, the Curiosity Mars rover at Gale is doing very well, and they just did another drilling into the surrounding there, and so that was another big success about a week ago, I think. So everything's going well. We've got quite a bit of activity on Mars, and China, has a attempted landing coming up in the late May, June timeframe. So we'll see how they do. They have a small rover on there. And the UAE, United Arab Emirates, that's seemingly going very well. They're very happy with the orbiter that's now around Mars. So Mars is taken care of right now by everybody. I think that's all I was really going to talk about. It. The SLS thing is significant because if they decide to go the Space Launch System, the booster that has to push this Artemis 1 spacecraft and be nobody on board, that thing is going to go off toward the moon and past the moon. and it's going to check out all the systems for Artemis 2, which would have a crew. So it's going to be a significant decision coming up next week. I think it's within a week, about when Artemis 1 may fly. The other thing is there's a new NASA administrator that was announced. It's a former Senator Bill Nelson from Florida, Democrat, kind of an interesting guy. He kind of, people always had problems with him. He didn't bully his way onto the space shuttle, but he actually flew as a senator. Anyway, some people hated him because they thought he was just ballast on there, but
He didn't throw up.
he didn't throw up. Jake Garan, a senator, they actually have a thing about Senator Jake Garan, who flew also on another shuttle mission, and he threw up so much they have a thing in NASA. I think Johnson Space Center is the Garan factor. If you get sick up there, how many Garns did you do?
You had a,
That's probably it for me.
you had a UAP slide too.
Huh?
You had a UAP slide.
Oh yeah, one thing to watch. We had that flying saucer UFO talk a couple of times ago. There's a task force that is underway that's supposedly going to put out a report on what they've coming up with, what the Navy pilots are seeing, these UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. And that report could be out June 1st or something like that. So that's imminent. Nobody quite understands exactly how they're going to report this. Did they find anything of value? It'll be interesting. It's definitely got all the UFO folks going, I told you so kind of thing early, but we'll see what the report says if it comes out like it's supposed to. And I think that's, there is what they're talking about, the UAPs. So we'll see.
It lasted 3 seconds before my share went.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Should we go to Tommy?
Go to Tommy.
So just so you know, Tommy is the head of our Cub Scouts, right? You're probably not meeting in person, but
Yeah, we're kind of on hiatus. We're looking to restart pretty soon. It's still pretty vague. I gotta get my ducks in a row and get a plan together for it. But yeah, we do want to get it restarted when it's safe.
Yeah, and when it's really safe, SkyWatchers.
Barbara, you gotta lean way in or we don't hear you.
Okay, yeah, we've talked about SkyWatchers working with the Cub Scouts on some astronomy, projects. So go ahead, Tommy.
Okay. So I saw a couple articles on Oumuamua, if I'm saying it right, and Barb said, "Why don't you present them?" I said, "Okay, great." So we figure out how to advance slides here. There. So in 2017, this fragment, I will call it, came arcing into our solar system. It did a swing around the sun following this kind of a trajectory and then shot out of the solar system. It was headed out toward it. This was in 2017, and it went basically crossed within Mars's orbit and then out of Mars's orbit from July till about October. So it was moving very quickly. What they observed at the time was its approach angle. It came from outside. It was extra solar. It was red in color, similar to the objects on the far edges of our solar system: Pluto, Triton, and some Kuiper Belt objects. And it underwent non-gravitational acceleration on June 27th. It kind of looked like what a comet does. If a comet outgasses, it accelerates. And they saw that and they said, well, maybe it's a comet. Only they didn't see any kind of a coma. So they said, well, maybe it's hydrogen ice. They did some modeling, and if it's hydrogen ice, it could not have survived. It would, the interstellar just cosmic rays would have broken it apart long ago. Some people thought maybe it's an alien object, a spaceship. That's pretty much been discounted by a lot of experts. And so Jackson and Desch did some analysis, and I like to give the conclusion first and then tell you how they got there. They're saying it's an ice nitrogen fragment. That fits a lot of their observations. It would not, ice nitrogen as it sublimates when it's exposed to the sun will not leave a visible coma. It also matches the color and the specularity of Pluto and Triton, which are covered with nitrogen ice, and it fit the acceleration. If it were water or something like a traditional comet as we think of them, it's a different acceleration curve. So that was in the first paper. The second paper they published, they did an analysis. They said, what did the Kuiper belt of our own solar system look like early on in the early stages of our solar system? And then they basically let Pluto or Neptune blast through it all and bust it all up. And a lot of fragments went ejecting out of our solar system on the order of 10 to the 14th. Half of them were ice water, H2O, and half of them were frozen nitrogen. And so by their calculations, their conclusions were Oumuamua was likely ejected 500 million years ago, that's a giga year, from a young solar system in the Perseus arm, which is an arm on our galaxy. We are in the Orion arm, which is next to the Perseus arm. So really far away. And it suggested an alternate type of exoplanet. They're calling them exoplutos, which I kind of thought was justice, that if Pluto can't be a planet, then maybe we can have exoplutos. So that's the sum of what they had in their articles, and I'm delighted I got to share it with you guys.
Thanks, Tommy. One of the things that was in that paper too is that the shape of Oumuamua is not asteroidal. And so this nitrogen model actually accounts for this weird flattening of the object. And then another paper came out this week that said we should expect something on the order of 7 or so of these objects every year entering the solar system. Oumuamua was the first we'd seen, but it certainly is not going to be the last.
There is a second one.
There's a second one?
There is a second one. I can't remember what it's called, but yeah, there was. I'm sorry?
Borisov?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Clark. There was some debate in our work meeting this week about whether this figure of 7 per year is believable, but I think you're right, John. It's certainly not going to be the last.
This brings up a topic that Barb and I have talked about a lot, that if there's subjects that you're interested in, or you see news that you want to share with us all, we welcome that. We would love for you guys to do that. So we really appreciate Tommy stepping forward and doing this for us. That was awesome.
Thank you guys. Thank you for letting me yap.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what Barb's holding up this book by, that's a new book that just came out, right?
Yeah, it's been out for a little bit, a couple of months.
Okay, so.
But that's the Harvard astrophysicist that kind of stirred up everybody and made everybody mad. It's pretty cool reading. I kind of like the guy. I think he's on to something, but it may not be this particular object. His point was that, we blow these things off and come up with a lot of theories, about what they could be. And he was saying, let's keep our minds open, as this was an interstellar spaceship that came by. I'm up for that. I like that idea. But anyway, he got into a real riff the other day with Jill Charter, a big SETI expert, and it was quite a little bit of a debate going on the Zoom. But he definitely lost a lot of points because people thought he was very rude. Anyway, I just threw that in. But the book's interesting reading.
What was the forum for that, Leonard?
I'd have to send you the link. I can't remember what it was. I know I think I posted something about it. I have to go back and look. I can't remember who held it. Seemed like it was the like AAS or American Astronomical Society or something. But they put quite a few people on there, and Jill and the Harvard guy really got into it. And it was definitely a great conversation. Controversial. Okay. Sorry.
So, ready to go? So, with Rod?
Did John have photos? Somebody had photos?
Yeah. John, what did you decide? Did you have a few photos?
I do, but since my computer's misbehaving, I'll just not, and we'll do it next time. And so Rod's up now.
All right. By the way, as long as we're sharing resources, I just watched the other day a presentation that Rob Manning, who is the chief engineer at JPL now, was the chief engineer on Pathfinder and the Mars exploration rovers and Curiosity as well, but now he's in charge of the whole shoot match. A wonderful guy, a wonderful presenter, very engaging. Did a talk for the Keck Institute of Space Studies over at Caltech, which is on their site. I think it's kiss.caltech.edu or something like that. It's easy enough to find. Great talk if you want to know more about Perseverance, and especially the EDL part. And he talks about EDL in a way that's fun, and it was a very quick hour for me because I usually don't do well on full on 1 hour 1 hour Zoom conferences. All right, so let's bring up screen share here.
So,
Let me
do a little
intro. We made up stuff.
Oh, okay. All right, unsharing.
Yeah.
Very good.
And I love that you got that great microphone there on your boat. But okay, so part of that is that you do what earlier today you did a talk. Maybe you can mention that, and then I'll get back to the
Okay.
intro.
I do about a 10 or 15 minute slot every Sunday on a radio show called The Tech Guy, which is it's sourced out of KFI here in Los Angeles originally, which was where I got primarily involved in radio, but now it's a national thing that a gent named Leo Laporte does from his 6,000 square foot mini mansion up in Petaluma, California. And it's a lot of fun. So that I've never done radio like this before, because usually they call you, Leonard knows, they call you and say, okay, can you talk about Perseverance for 10 minutes or about, what's happening with SLS or something. Give us some good news about SLS. On this show, he basically says, what are they going to talk about this week? And then I just go. So it's a lot of fun.
That's great. And they could access that on your website, right? I think there's a link on there.
Actually, I've been too lazy to put it on there yet. So I need to do that. And thank you for the reminder.
Sure. Because so we sent out, I think you saw it, Rod, too, but a lot of information about you. But I wanted to point out a few things. You're an award-winning space author and journalist. And not only this amazing stories of the space age book that you wrote, which I guess it's best if they want to get that through Amazon. Would you?
Yeah, I think especially until our shots take hold. Yeah.
Okay. And you're also editor of Ad Astra.
Can't hear you, Barb.
Okay.
You cut out again.
You're also editor of Ad Astra magazine, the magazine of the National Space Society.
Following in Leonard's footsteps, we should know.
Leonard's a former editor of that magazine. It's a great one and comes out 4 times a year, right?
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Rod also writes for Popular Science and Space.com, a number of other publications. And he got his master's degree at Stanford University. Very impressive. Yeah, so in the email we sent out that I'm sure everybody got, because they're here, you know, and that's what the link was in. We've got a link to your Amazon books. And how many books have you written altogether now?
If you include the 2 for JPL, it's 17. So I'm working on 18 now.
All right. What are you working on? What's the 18?
Sorry, we can't
hear you,
out
Barb.
again.
What are you working on now? What book?
It's
What's
a
it on?
secret. It's a secret Mars project.
Okay. Okay. When it comes out, let us know and we'll let everybody know. Yeah, why don't I turn it over to you and we'll get going and show people a whole bunch of amazing stories. And I know you said the book came out in, I think, 2017.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and so you've updated it updated your presentation with another.
Oh yeah.
Barb.
Barb, I think your mic plug might be a little loose because you're cutting in and out quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's in the computer. So.
Oh.
Okay.
Huh.
So I hope you heard most of that. And go ahead.
I got most of it. The important thing to know is I basically just follow around behind Leonard about 20 years later. So wherever he's been, I end up at some point, whether it's the NSS or space.com or Ad Astra. Or Leonard, when you did Ad Astra, it was a monthly or bi-monthly?
It was monthly.
Oh,
almost killed me.
Yeah, I could barely do quarterly. By the way, if anybody's interested, this is National Space Society's magazine. We will be on the newsstands again for the first time, I think, in over 20 years. Coming up in about a month here. And because it's the National Space Society, of course, we have a special edition on space settlement, but a lot of people don't know what that means. So we're calling it Living in Space, and it's 100 pages. Did you ever do 100 pages, Leonard?
No.
That was not fun. And you can imagine with that topic, there's a little bit of pushback from one person or another, you know?
Yeah, right.
We're going to Mars first. Now we're going to the moon. But it's fun. And it ought to be a great issue, but I'll stop blathering now and get on with the show here. So let's see if we can make this work. I have to make sure I select the right video feed. Oh, good. I think that's, yeah, it's going to, there's a couple of bits of music that are going to sound a little tinny, but you have to choose either your voice or the system. So I'll choose my voice because why not? So let me just...
I think everyone knows this, but if the box with all our pictures in it is blocking out some of it, you can just go to the minus or the little line up in the left-hand corner, and that'll take it out of the way.
Minimize it,
bring
yeah.
it up. Yeah, minimize it. That's
so if for some reason something stops working, let me know. If my feed freezes again, I may disappear for 15 seconds, but I promise I'm not going anywhere. So here's the book, Amazing Stories of the Space Age, where I had to struggle with the author for the design of the cover because the first cover they gave me, I'm sure Leonard's familiar with this, and many of you have probably also written books, these are stories from the space age of either missions that were discussed and planned and sometimes budgeted but never flown, or missions that were flown and we didn't hear much about, which is why they're amazing. But the first cover I got back from the publisher, delightful people that they were, was a space station era astronaut hovering over the Earth with the Earth rising in the background. And I called the publisher and said, you know, I just don't know how to express how many levels this is wrong on. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, the Earth can't rise over the Earth. That just can't happen. Why not? Let me call you back later. So I ended up designing it myself. So here's Ed White floating around in front of the manned orbiting laboratory, which we won't be talking about tonight, but we love the MOL. So for the few of you who may not remember everything about the space age, although I'm sure most of us do, let's have a very quick review. And bonus points for anybody who recognizes the music.
I don't think we hear the music.
I hear nothing.
Oh, I know why. Sorry, I realized what I did. Let's try that again. Select a speaker, MacBook Pro speakers. Okay.
I hear nothing.
No sound.
There's John Glenn and Freedom 7, I think. 3 to 1.
Well, that's curious. Apparently it doesn't like it. Okay. Well, I'm humming in my mind the music from Hawaii 5-0 because that's very 60s. So you can pretend. Can you hear me at least?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Well, let me plug my headphones back in then. We'll pretend it's playing that truly cool music from the old days.
Sounds of silence.
So Mercury, then Gemini, of course. And on to Apollo. Well, let's get the spacewalks out of the way first. Got a few things out of sequence here, but I'm sure you caught that. So that's the space age we had. Actually, I know what I'm going to try. Okay. There we go. All right. Well, I won't put you through that again, but at least I'm just going to go on the system microphone because apparently my new expensive microphone isn't happy tonight. All right. So that was the space age, but there is another space age we could have had, which is a lot of what the planning I'm talking about came from. And this was the brainchild of our good friend, Werner von Braun, retired Nazi, who was brought over to the reputedly a retired Nazi from Germany in World War II, was brought over to the US at the end of the war. I think he got kind of a bum rap. At worst, he was probably amoral, but there's a lot of talk about that. But had he been in charge from the beginning, instead of being sidelined while they were figuring a lot of this out, maybe our space age would look more like this. Now that's a bit of a mashup of a bunch of different things that von Braun wanted to do, but suffice to say, there were multiple alternatives to what we ended up with the NASA plans, most of which were at least partly military in nature, starting in the 1950s. The Army, of course, so military, different branches of the military always fight because that's what they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to fight with each other, but that's often what happens. So the Army was, when we were talking about, okay, we've got to get into orbit and beyond because the Reds are on their way there. The Army said, yeah, we'll do it. It's the ultimate high ground. And the Air Force said, no, we're the pilots. We should do it. And the Navy characteristically said, yes, but we build submarines and they're just like spaceships, so we should do it. So there was a lot of pushing and pulling, and I'm obviously simplifying a bit, but in charge of at least part of this was von Braun. And I just throw this in here to sort of indicate what I think is at best, as I said, amorality, which is what he said when the first V2 smashed into London and blew up some buildings. He said the rocket performed perfectly, it just landed on the wrong planet. So those are our quotes for the evening. So Origin of the space race, I'm sure you all know, we and the Russians exited World War II as allies of a kind, but we had atomic weapons and they didn't like that. And soon we had the H-bomb, and then soon by hook or by crook and by stealing a few things, they got atomic weapons. And we're not happy about that. But at that point, we're still flying these things over there by propeller-driven plane and a little later jets. But the big fear became, what if the bad guys can drop bombs from outer space? And this is very scary for a lot of people. And when I grew up, and I'm sure a number of you remember this as well, we got booklets like Survival Under Atomic Attack. And I don't remember his name, Yertle the Turtle or somebody, who taught us how to duck and cover by pulling inside our shell. And then they lower a firecracker onto him and it goes snap and he survives, which is a little different than an atomic weapon. But when you're talking to fifth graders, you don't want to scare them too much. And then finally, my favorite was the drop drill days, where we all huddled under a half-inch of formica because that was going to protect us from a 5,000-degree thermonuclear fireball. Now, I questioned that when I was in elementary school because we had floor-to-ceiling glass windows facing south where we would expect the missiles to come in from. But the teacher said, shut up, you're making a fuss, just get out of your desk and be quiet. She said that a lot, actually, not always during drop drills. But I did find out later when the Soviet Union fell and some of the materials became briefly declassified, that if you looked at Pasadena, California, where I grew up, it looked like a big Venn diagram with 3 red circles. So there was one big red circle around Jet Propulsion Laboratory, one big red circle around Caltech, and one big red circle around a naval weapons lab off to the east in Pasadena. And all 3 of them overlapped on my elementary school. So clearly there would have been no problem for Micah or not. We wouldn't have suffered long, and that was a plus. So what were we looking at in these days? Well, there was talk about building von Braun's orbital space station, which could observe from orbit, and some talk of atomic weapons, although I've never found the definitive source on this. By the way, I didn't know this for years. Some of you probably knew it, but this space station's design was inflatable. This wasn't metal. This was made out of synthetic rubber. And we would have flown up in many launches of the von Braun shuttle, which he wanted to launch multiple times a day, would have flown up these sections and hooked them together and inflated them. And one of the knocks against it by NASA was, what if some overly ambitious astronaut starts bouncing around there and punctures the thing? Seems like kind of an absurd concern, but they did talk about that. They also looked at orbital bomber planes. These are ideas that came out of Nazi Germany from the Sanger Skip bomber back in the late 30s, early 40s, which would be able to barely reach orbit, bounce off the atmosphere a couple of times, then re-enter over the target. In our case, it would have been Moscow and like targets. Never did that. Once we got the Gemini program moving along on paper, there was looking at using those as orbital interceptors to rendezvous with and possibly disable Soviet spacecraft. One of my favorite plans was, and I think this was robotic, but they were worried about Soviet spy satellites. And one of the engineers in the room said, well, we don't have to blow them up. We can just go spray paint their camera lenses. And I thought, that's brilliant. That's beautifully elegant in its simplicity. But above all, the big interest, I think, was for a lot of them, we got to seize the high ground of the moon before the Russians do, because for some reason, people thought that the moon was an ideal place to lob nuclear rockets down on Earth to cause terrible harm, as opposed to just doing it from point to point on Earth. So here comes the militarization of space. And my first scenario, I'm only going to do 3, which is the U.S. Army's plans on the moon. This is Project Horizon. Very interesting study, done pretty quickly in the late 1950s with von Braun and the U.S. Army, because that's who he was working with at that point. So basically, they wanted to build an American Army base on the moon with somewhere between 12 and 20 soldiers, depending on which version you read. This would have all been done with direct descent spacecraft, so it would have been assembled in orbit and sent off from there. But instead of a lunar module like we are used to, it'd be something more like what you see here, where you're landing, looking over your shoulder at the surface coming up behind you, which would have been fairly thrilling. The intended launch point was Christmas Island in the mid-Pacific because A, it was isolated, and B, it was down near the equator, so you got a little more bang for your buck launching into equatorial orbit. So the first crews would go and scout sites on the lunar surface for 90 days, because how hard can it be after all? Then they'd send a 9-man construction crew that would use explosives and heavy equipment to dig trenches for the habitats. And the estimated time for all that construction would be less than a month. And they expected it to be in full swing by 1966 and 67, because this is the Army and they're a little optimistic. So here's what it would look like. So you see the habitat shells there. They're about 15 by 20 or 30 feet. So you'd have to use this heavy equipment to dig these trenches, roll the habs in there, connect them together, make them airtight, and then cover them over with enough lunar soil to protect them from radiation, which at that point, we really didn't know how much radiation there was in space. We knew there would be some, but we didn't know it would be as hostile as it is. And over there on the left in that crater is, I can't use the pointer because I'm running this in slide mode, but there's 2 nuclear reactors over there on the left, because if you're going to be on the moon, use nukes. So this is just a cross section of those modules. So it would have been a very nice base, actually, had they been able to do it. This is the direct descent, transit and landing and return vehicle. Let me just minimize my faces here. Oh, I see. That's interesting. I can't use my mouse. Okay. And this is a computer rendering of it. And just for scale, this is the lunar module. So you can see that they were thinking big. This was basically going to have just an engine bay that was the same size as the entire lunar module. And we were going to build a whole bunch of these because we'd be constantly resupplying and rotating people out. So here's what it looks like in the middle going up, and here's what it looks like in the middle coming home. Carries between 10 and 16 chisel-jawed military guys. It's about 21 by 12 feet, just the top part, the nose cone. And if you look, you can see over here, that's one guy lying with his faceplate about 18 inches from a steel bulkhead. And so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 we can see in this drawing alone. So you basically, after spending 2 or 3 months on the moon, probably not having anything other than quick showers with a couple of wipies, you're lined up side by side with a steel bulkhead in front of your face with 10 to 16 other guys plunging in a ballistic trajectory in this nose cone shaped thing and praying to God that the parachutes work at the right time. So it wouldn't have been for me. I got in a Gemini capsule once for about 5 minutes, and they closed the hatch on my head. And at my height, which is about 5'10", came down right on my hair, and I broke into a cold sweat instantly and said, "Let me out." So clearly I'm not the right guy to be flying on this thing. I get nervous in elevators. The doors take too long to open. So nuclear powered. They had general quarters, labs, sick bay, and an office, whatever that means. And they hope to have 10 missions under their belt by 1968 with a permanent base. But it gets better. The best part is we were going to have moon soldiers. Because if we're going to go to the moon, surely the Russians are going to show up too, and we have to be able to protect ourselves. So here's what the moon soldier, the well-dressed moon soldier wears. The things on the bottom that look like ice skates are actually snowshoes, except in this case they're moon shoes because we didn't know how deep the dust was. Had it been as bad as some people thought, those would have done you no good at all. And then moving clockwise, we have the radiator, the antenna loop, and then the only other thing they found fit to label was the excretor receptacles. I'm not quite sure why that is. Didn't talk about the backpack or the helmet or anything, just the excretor receptacles. But anyway, this would be your moon soldier all dressed up for combat. And in the study, I won't read this whole thing, but basically towards the end, it says we want to do science and Earth observation and exploration and all good things, but also we want to be able to defend our moon base against attack from the Reds. So that was a large priority. Well, how do you do that? The moon's a very hostile and weird environment, which we barely were able to explore 10 to 15 years after this with the technology we had. Well, use the right weapons. So for instance, a nuclear bazooka, because why not? So this is the M2829 Davy Crockett, a 51-pound warhead. It was eventually deployed to Europe, although it was never used, thank goodness. Had a 1 to 3 mile range, a sub-kiloton yield, an equivalent of about 10 tons of TNT. I show this to some people and they said, really, are you sure that thing was ever built? Well, I have proof. Here it is being test fired out in the Nevada desert. Off it goes. And kaboom, bye-bye Russians. There's everybody with their cool old guy glasses looking at it. So they worked, but as I said, they were deployed but never used. But they thought, well, this is the ideal weapon on the moon. One problem was you'd have to figure out the exact right velocity at which to launch that thing so it didn't go all the way around the moon and come hit you from behind, because escape velocity isn't very high. But while we're at it, let's send up Lunar Claymores. So here's the M18 Claymore, which they weren't going to do much to modify. It's filled with little 1/8 inch steel balls. So it's basically a big bucket of BBs with an explosive charge behind it. And it can go about 350 feet. Now, why is this an ideal moon weapon? Well, for one thing, there's no air resistance to these balls, so they've got a heck of a lot of range. And for the other thing, on the moon, you don't have to kill the bad guy. All you have to do is puncture his spacesuit, and that ties up 2 other cosmonauts, dragging him back behind the nearest rock or berm. So the Claymore was a very desirable weapon for the moon, apparently. But there's more. Sorry. First, let me talk about delivery. So at that point, all we had was a Saturn II rocket, had about 2 million pounds of thrust, a little more than a quarter of the Saturn V. 6,000 pounds deliverable to the moon, whereas the command module, lunar module, weighed between 80 and 90,000 pounds. So you can see there's a big discrepancy here between our punch factor and what we wanted to do. So we thought, well, we'll just do refueling in orbit. So they were going to build these orbital fuel repositories, which are, of course, all rocket upper stages that are filled with fuel and go up and put together. Not really that different from what Elon Musk is trying to do with his tanker version of the Starship now, except that these were put together into one little arrangement. So they plan to build their moon base with about 150 flights, maybe 200. And the development of that and all the launches and the base and the hardware was going to cost $6 billion in 1960 dollars. Hardy, har, har. As it turned out, we did 11 lunar flights instead with Apollo and the tests and operations, and that was about 24 billion in 1965 dollars, or about 160 to 200 billion now, depending on who you believe. So kind of doubtful the Project Horizon would have panned out, but it's kind of a fun idea to look at. Here's what we did get. As I said, we got Apollo, and out of that magnificent 363-foot rocket, that's how much of it actually came home. So you can see what you're talking about in terms of mass and throw weight and all that. Most of this guy is fuel and droppable stages. So when you really start getting realistic about noodling the numbers, I think they were being a little optimistic. The problem with Apollo is it was a closed-end system, more or less, and when it was over, it was truly over. But it didn't have to be. But before we leave the moon base completely alone, I'd like to cite a study from the Rock Island Armory called "The Meanderings of a Weapon-Oriented Mind When Applied in a Vacuum Such as the Moon." Now, that's a kind of whimsical title, and I think it's a way of saying I'm building moon weapons, but I don't want to say exactly that I'm building moon weapons, but they might be moon weapons. So here you have 2 lunar soldiers ahead of something that says U.S. Army on the side that looks like the Nina the Pinta or the Santa Maria, but I think it's supposed to be a moon tank of some kind. So here's our first moon gun. This is my favorite, actually, because it's a very elegant little spring-loaded thing that just fires a spherical projectile, which will go far enough to hopefully intercept and puncture the other guy's spacesuit. Didn't say how far, but it's cool looking, isn't it? Here's a slightly more advanced version that has a clip with multiple rounds, and no word on what those little heat-looking diffuser discs are on the barrel, but this thing does have a front barrel grip, so you would be able to presumably fire this pointy projectile much further and really hurt the guy in the other spacesuit. I think the decorations on the top back end are just because they're cool. Here's my real favorite, the sausage gun, and it holds as many charges as there are holes in it, and it's either a gas-filled pellet or a small rocket propelled bullet. And a company did actually bring out a handgun sidearm called the Gyrojet a few years later that was tried in Vietnam with rocket-propelled bullets, and it was found to be terribly ineffective because they speed up so slowly that they can be deflected by a palm frond. And there's a few of those in Vietnam, so that's kind of a problem. My favorite part about the sausage gun is the jaunty pen clip on the lower right, because all well-dressed space soldiers should be able to stick this in their pocket while they're roaming around. Here's another one, same idea, using little projectiles. So ultimately, we could have had nice big main battle tanks on the moon fighting the Reds, but instead we did Apollo, and I think that was better all the way around. But it's an interesting bit of planning for something that we never actually pulled off. So let's talk about scenario number 2. About the same time, late 1950s, we start talking about atomic rockets, and there's 2 big families of them, 3 if you include fusion, but that's still something we haven't mastered. In the fission side, you basically have one scenario where you've got a nuclear reactor that's heating some kind of reaction mass. Could be hydrogen, could be a lot of things. That's streaming out the back, and it's just a very high-powered rocket, but it's still a conventional rocket with a heat source that's atomic. And they go faster than the Saturn V, and everybody wins. The solar system is ours, and we save the day. There was another plan called Project Orion, and you could begin seeing elements of this in some of the various pop science magazines and pulps of the 1940s and 50s. Practical Mechanics there, which I've never heard of before, was from 1957. Then the Europeans got in the act and made it look both more elegant and slightly sinister. Then finally, about 1950, we start getting things that are a little close to the truth. Here's the atomic rocket from Destination Moon, which was a very cool movie if you've never seen it. So this is what they promised us. We were going to have big empty decks with push button gravity and lots of room to walk around and Barco loungers and cool uniforms and all this. But instead, what we actually got, at best, up until the shuttle started flying, was 330 cubic feet of command module where you're sitting shoulder to shoulder with your buddies. It's a little bigger when you're in weightlessness, but it's tight quarters. It's not quite what we had envisioned when I was a kid. And this is what we wanted. You know, we wanted to have Forbidden Planet with their big, didn't have to look like a flying saucer, but we wanted something big enough that you could walk around and do your space business like a true military guy. Well, how do we accomplish that? Well, we have Project Orion, not the Orion capsule, but the original Orion, which is a nuclear pulse vehicle. And to put it in very blunt terms, as many of you probably know, it's a large 50 caliber bullet-shaped rocket ship that's powered by small nuclear bombs. So this particular version was 170 by 135 feet, although it's a little out of proportion in the drawing. Mass up to 22 million pounds. There were about 10 different designs cited, but on average, this is about where they came in at. Had at least 4,000 times the thrust of the Saturn V, carried a crew of 70 to 100, many, many tons of cargo, and would have been able to cross the solar system in a matter of months or maybe a year and a half. So it's a cool idea, but it had a few drawbacks. That's Buzz Aldrin down there for scale, by the way, of the red circle. So this is the medium-sized one. And as Freeman Dyson, who worked on the project, liked to say, it started in 1957 at General Atomics. Air Force got involved in, I think, 58 or 59, and then NASA got involved in the early 60s, but by the mid-60s, it was gone. But Freeman Dyson's statement was Mars by 1965 and Saturn by 1970, which I love. By their figuring, would have been the same or less than Apollo, and given the large nuclear stockpiles we had, that's a possibility. And they felt they could have done a single launch expedition to the moon, Mars, and beyond if they gotten their trajectories right. So what happened to poor Orion? Well, it had a couple of downsides. For the large ones, you had to launch them from Earth, which would involve somewhere between 200 and 500 nuclear explosions in the open atmosphere. Some people took a dim view of that. Now, Dyson's calculations would have added no more than 1% to the atmospheric contamination, which was pretty high in 1960 because of all the open air testing we were doing. And he figured a little bit dispassionately that there might be, on average, 1 or 2 deaths per launch, which seems like a terrible thing until you realize that back at that time, when I was a little kid riding around the back of my parents' car with no seatbelts, 36,400 people were dying in the U.S. every year from auto accidents, probably mostly in Corvairs. But one way or the other, this was not deemed to be socially acceptable. So they repurposed it in a much smaller version to go up on top of a Saturn V. Still would have been much faster by multiples than the Saturn V, and I've been able to go much further because you've got these sudden bursts of acceleration and you can coast for quite a while. But that was not to be. However, they did test it in kind of an analog sense. They took conventional explosives, devised a little guy called the putt-putt, and here's what it looked like. It goes bang, 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 bang. bang. So you can see the idea works. It didn't exactly go straight, but if you have a full nav system and maneuvering rockets and all that kind of thing, it could have worked fine. And in case you're wondering what those nuclear bombs exploded against, there was what they call a pusher plate on the bottom that had a bunch of big shock absorbers. So it would absorb the force of the explosion on that side and then transfer that energy into the vehicle via large springs. So it sounds wacky, but it could have worked. However, 63, here comes a nuclear test ban. That begins to really rain on their parade. By the time the Outer Space Treaty is signed in 1967, we not only can't have nuclear weapons in space, but we can't have any weapons of mass destruction or claim territory. So fun time's over. And finally, between 68 and 70, we get Earth Day, and nobody's going to let us knowingly fly large masses of fissile material up into orbit and beyond, even though we did still fuel some of our satellites and unmanned spacecraft with that. The amounts were considered small enough to be relatively safe. So that never happened, but Orion could have been a glorious way, and I lament its loss because we would clearly have been to the outer solar system with people by now. And the great thing about Orion is you don't have to worry about mass constraints. You don't have to worry about radiation shielding. Radiation out in space, line it with lead. It doesn't matter. It's so powerful. It could go at such velocities. You could basically build this thing however you want. Not lead, probably. They would have lined it with a water jacket, but you wouldn't have the challenges we have now with trying to get to Mars. So we kind of fell back from these large plans and decided, okay, we've got to go with this Apollo hardware we built because it cost a lot of money, worked really well at the moon. What else can we do with it? So they had a group in NASA called the Apollo Applications Office. And some of their plans were possibly a long-term lunar habitat, something like Project Horizon, but much, much smaller. They had designs for a device which I think was called the MOLEM. It was basically a lunar rover that could drive around, and then they had a larger design for a small habitat that could drive around the moon. Either one would have been very cool, because instead of having to always go back to the LEM, you could just basically hop in your rover. That's your house on wheels, and you go where you want until it's time to leave the moon again. Then it gets a little more interesting. We're going to look at an Apollo Venus flyby. I mean, nobody wants to land there because it's the trailer park of the solar system. It's very hot and got a lot of intense atmospheric pressure there, about 900 psi, almost 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And as far as we know, there's nothing terribly interesting there except geology. But then we got the bright idea, and this actually was worked up in the 1950s, that you could take an Apollo class spacecraft, run it past Venus, then fly by Mars, then fly by Venus again, and then come home, which is kind of a cool adventure when you think about it. So here's the one design for the Apollo Venus spacecraft. Now, this is about a year, and you see the Apollo capsule there, the gumdrop top part, which is 330 cubic feet. So you can see that habitat isn't a whole lot bigger. This is about the size of the first Chinese space station that went up about 10 years ago, and would have been a cramped trip for a year. And those little cones down at the bottom are drop probes when you're circling Venus, because at that point we weren't having a lot of luck with space robots, and NASA figured, well, let's just send guys there and they can deploy them as they're rounding the planet and hopefully get some data back before they come home. So it was based on Apollo hardware set for the late 70s, 1 year flyby trajectory. Another goal was deep space astronomy, because they figured they could get a lot done while they're out there, because we didn't have space telescopes yet. And this is studied from 63 on until about 1970, 72. Didn't happen. Then we looked at the Venus-Mars-Venus system. And again, this is just one of the designs, but you can see it's appreciably larger, because now you're talking about 2 years in space, or almost 3 actually, 850 days. This would have launched in a window in 1981. They figured they'd drop probes flying around Venus and when they flew around Mars. And then when they flew around Venus the second time, they'd be able to retrieve data from drifters that had been drifting in the atmosphere on balloons, at least. They didn't figure the ones at the surface would last that long. Also deep space astronomy. And perhaps most ambitiously, they planned a Mars sample return from the Martian surface during an 8 to 12 hour flyby. So they wanted to land something, grab soil, jump back up to orbit, try and rendezvous and dock with this thing as it's speeding around Mars at extremely high velocity, and bring that sample home. Probably wouldn't have worked, but you got to give them credit for trying. And it would have been nice to see the Apollo hardware used a lot more. And I've looked for years, and I did finally find a study. I think I whined to you about this also, Leonard. I wanted to find a study comparing if we had run Apollo out for another 30 years and amortized it the way the Russians did with Soyuz versus diverting to the shuttle, which would have been cheaper. And it looks like the Saturn V Apollo combination, although with different capabilities, would have been roughly half. So that's one favorable thing, and probably safer, but we don't know. So it's all guesswork. What we did get was Skylab. And so the main structure there is the S4B stage. It's the upper stage of the Saturn V, which was modified as a space laboratory, which incidentally would have been the same hardware they would have used for the larger Apollo, Venus, Mars, Venus flights. And that would have been cool because that's big inside. Now you can spend a year in there if you have to. That isn't so bad. And I don't remember which crew member that is, but he's doing somersaults inside. So this is about 22 by 80 feet, I think. So that's it's still the largest single volume item that's ever been sent into space with Skylab. And it's a shame that we lost it. The only problem with this long mission is your astronauts would look something like this when they got back, because there's a lot of radiation out there and we didn't know enough about it then. And the early plans for shielding was, well, we'll line the thing with polyethylene. That'll be good enough. And maybe we'll put up a little more steel. The problem is steel hulls, as you probably most of you know, if you hit it with a high energy particle in the right way, it creates more particles on the other side that go spalling off and cook the people inside and damage their chromosomes and other things. So, I think if Leonard and I were willing to volunteer, that'd be okay because we're old guys, and if we can last 10 more years, that's cool. I figure I might have 15, I'm not sure. But if you're a 36-year-old strapping astronaut, you don't want to have your chromosomes cooked. So during this time, however, the Ruskies were not sitting idle. They were flying space stations. Once they realized they weren't going to beat us to the moon, they said, okay, we were never really trying to beat to the moon anyway. Well, why did you blow up 4 great big N1 rockets in the process? Well, that was just a mistake. So they're building orbital platforms of their own. This is the Salyut series, sometimes also known as Almaz, which was the military designation. And this is a longer saga, but what I found particularly interesting was Salyut 3, which, as you can see here, if you imagine the scale, it's not that much bigger than the full Soyuz spacecraft. So these are pretty cramped. But this did pioneer space stations. They went up a couple of years before Skylab. But there's a little bit of paranoia here. As I said, these were originally designated as military platforms. And part of the plan was to be able to supplement spy satellites by looking down at operations in unfriendly countries like the United States. Well, the United States might frown on that. What happens if the United States decides to get frisky and do something naughty? So here's a cutaway view of that, so you can get a general idea of how cramped it was. So here's Salyut 3 in orbit. And let's just say, and there were some studies done to see if Apollo could be modified for military uses. Let's just say the command module shows up with a nice big gun turret on top and it wants to take a pot shot at the Salyut station. Well, you better not try, because on the back of that Salyut 3 station was a Gatling gun. It was an anti-aircraft gun mounted on the left portion there, and that would have been bye-bye command module. And here's what it looked like. It's called the Richter Gun. I think it was 30 millimeter slugs. I can't remember the exact caliber, but they mounted this thing on the back of one of the Soyuz stations, and they wanted to test it. But the cosmonauts finally said, there's a lot of stuff up here that could break, and we're not keen on this idea. Can you wait until we're gone? And so Moscow said, fine. So just after they departed, they fired this thing off and ran out a whole mag. And for the next couple of years, you had spent slugs in orbit whizzing around at very high velocities, because that's what happens when you fire a machine gun in space. And as it turned out, of course, Apollo never showed up in any form, and the space shuttle was way too late to come rendezvous with them. But doggone it, they were ready. So, spasiba. So what's coming up next? Well, as most of you know, we've talked about it. We got the SLS trudging along, grossly over budget and over schedule, but at least now we've seen some signs of life there. This is the original livery of what it would have looked like if they had painted it like the Saturn V, which I like much better than the orange tank, but you can't get everything. We're going to be doing our moon loop, as Leonard mentioned, with Artemis 1 in a year or two or more. And then we're going to land the first woman and then the next man on the moon with what may very well be some hardware from Blue Origin over there on the left. Because Blue Origin's national team, of course, has Blue Origin, Draper Labs, who built the computers for the Apollo spacecraft and the Lunar Module, and Northrop Grumman as partners. Grumman, of course, famously built the LEM, so that's a hard team to beat. There's other contenders, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the national team. Lunar Gateway is still in process. Now, I have not heard, Leonard, maybe you know, I'd love to hear afterwards, what happens with the Russians pulling out, because I think they were supplying at least one module, but apparently they don't want to play with us anymore, so they're going to go work with the Chinese, but we're still planning to have a gateway in this weird, what do they call it? It's a halo orbit. High latitude rectilinear orbit, something like that. Anyway, it's a north to south orbit, which allows us to exploit the poles. You know, you still hear people saying we don't need gateway. Then you hear other people saying, no, we need gateway to learn how to go to Mars. I don't have a position on the subject. I just hope if they're going to do it, they do it soon. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because most of you already know this. Here's Starship. All he's testing at this point is this top part, the one that looks like a water rocket. The heavy lift vehicle is the one behind, and that's the one I want to go see take off in person, because that's 28 to 30 Raptor engines, and that's going to be a big hullabaloo, especially if it comes back unhappy. We've got the 2023 quote unquote maybe mission with the Japanese billionaire and 8 of his closest friends circling the moon and coming back, and I applied for my crew slot. I hope you all did. Lunar exploitation, Mars sometime, you know, he said everything from 2026 on, 2030s, I think. Just for scale, there's Starship stacked up against the Saturn V and a Falcon 9 to your right. So it's a big rocket. And if that thing works, it changes the whole equation. We're very happy. And I just couldn't resist this because I am a fan of science fiction, and I was a child born in the mid-50s. There's Starship on the left, and here's Rocket Ship XM on the right, starring Lloyd Bridges. And it was a terrible movie, but by golly, that rocket looks familiar. It was a press scrum a couple of years ago when somebody asked Elon why he had changed the latest fin derivation. And besides the fact they're aerodynamic, he said, I like them because they look cool. So if you're a billionaire and you're building your own rockets, you can do whatever the heck you want. Past doesn't equal the future. We know about Blue Origin. The one thing I'll point out about Blue Origin is they're a little behind on their rockets compared to SpaceX, but they're building the largest, as far as I know, the largest single chamber rocket engine in the world now. And making it even weirder is they're selling them. They're not using them just on their rocket, but they're selling them to United Launch Alliance, which is a competitor in launch services. So I'm sure there's sound business thinking there, but it's not something we've become accustomed to in aerospace. But it's a beautiful engine, and I really hope things go well. Of course, the Chinese are building their multi-mode space station, module space station. This was the best picture I could find. I do have a photo of it in their museum. And by the way, if you ever get to Shanghai, go to the Science Museum, because they have a rocket room with all these rockets. And it's really interesting. No matter which rocket they are, they're all the same height in the room. So the Saturn V is no taller than their Long March 2. Because, of course, we all know that all rockets are created equal, and the Chinese ones are just as big and just as powerful and just as awesome as anything we ever did. It's an interesting experience. And last point here, this is the SLS, the latest green run. The 2 green runs were, I think, 6 months apart. I've sort of lost count, but I think in that period of time, and I know I'm comparing apples and oranges here, so I'm not being fair, but I think in that time, Starship has done either 4 or 5 flights. Just wanted to make that point visually, because I think Elon's onto something here, which is test it, break it, fix it, and test it again. So in closing, I want to quote my favorite guy, Gene Kranz, who I had the good fortune to interview a couple of times back in the 2000s. Here he is, and I think that's his Apollo 17 vest. His wife made him a new one for each mission. So I went to interview him, and we sat down, talked for about an hour. And as I always did at the end of interviews with veterans or space professionals, I say, thank you very much. I really appreciate you giving me the gift of your time. Is there anything you want to add? And most of these older guys say, no, I think that's about it. But Kranz looked down at the floor for a second, and then looked up at me with those steely missile man eyes of his and said, "What America will dare, America can do." It gave me chills then, and it still does now, because he's right. And I guess the big question is, what will we dare? And all I could say is I'm very glad for the entrepreneurs like Bezos and Musk that came along and gave aerospace kind of a boot in the behind, and are also helping NASA with fair-priced cooperative technologies, which by NASA's own estimation cost, in the case of the Falcon 9 and the Dragon 2, the Crew Dragon, cost between half and maybe as little as a tenth of what it would have cost the traditional way with cost plus contracting. So I think we're on our way. And I just want to say welcome to Space 2.0. Oh, I inadvertently put up an ad for my other book. I'm so sorry. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. And I'm going to stop sharing and answer any questions that I can.
Yeah, we'd all like to. I don't know if you can hear us, but
yes. Thank you very much. This was fun.
Oh, that was great. Really enjoyed that. You know, I knew this was going to be a good one for our group. You know,
I hope it wasn't too basic. I talked to Barb a little bit because I wasn't sure. You know, most of us grew up during the space race, so I know a lot of this is old hat, but it's just fun to see it again. So I hope you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. I think very interesting seeing what could have happened, you know, too.
Yeah. What a different time it would have been.
Yeah, really. So do some of you have questions? I think John can unmute you all, or you can unmute yourself, I think.
You'll have to unmute yourself, but please do and ask away.
Looks like Bob's got his hand up.
Hey, Rod, thank you. Great talk. I really enjoyed it. I had not seen a lot of that stuff before, the machine guns in space, and so it was, you know, really exciting that you dug all that up. But you know, back to the more mundane, you mentioned the MOL, the Man Orbiting Lab, but you didn't talk about it. That was actually kind of close to flying, wasn't it? What happened there?
Yeah. So that's in the, you know, I can only cover a few things out of the book. Otherwise we'd be here all night, and that's not good for anybody. But the Man Orbiting Laboratory was an Air Force project that ran, as I recall, from 62 or 63 till I think 71 or 72. It kind of got kicked off about the same time as Dinosaur, which was the Air Force mini shuttle, which was later replaced. You know, they prototyped small mock-ups of that, and they had done some really good work on the mini shuttle, but that got scrapped in 63. And Boeing took a bit of a bath on that. So then they said, okay, so we'll start flying Air Force versions of the Gemini called Blue Gemini. And we'll have Air Force astronauts, and they trained a bunch of them. And that was the beginning of the Manned Orbiting Laboratory program, which is basically an upper Titan stage extended with a big, I think the aperture was something like 40-inch or 50-inch.
Uh-oh.
Robotic satellites weren't doing great in that time period in the early 60s. So the plan was, well, we'll just send guys up, because if we send men up, they can do anything. So there was going to be crews of 2 at a time. They did not fly any crews on a Blue Gemini flight, but they did fly an unmanned test version of the Gemini capsule with a hatch in the heat shield, because they wanted to make sure it wouldn't melt. Because the way the thing, if you remember the cover of my book, basically it looked just like the Gemini did on the Titan. You had to open that hatch in the heat shield and climb down a very small little tunnel into fairly cramped quarters. And although it looks big on the outside, most of that's a telescope. So back there, you've got this enormous telescope that you're using to, you know, read the titling on Russian golf balls or something. So, but that finally got canned by Defense Secretary McNamara. I think it was a victim of Vietnam and better robotics, because as a lot of you know, by the late 60s, we had incredible spy satellites going up that were returning film cartridges by parachute that were being caught by airplanes with skyhooks on the front. So
it sounds like the fact that as a program, even though the you know, early spy satellites were rapidly getting better than what a human with a telescope could do, that they still hung on to it right through the Apollo program.
Yeah, and it would have been substantially less expensive, and would have done some good science up there too. I mean, it was really kind of a mini Skylab, but you know, the military just didn't have a good record with that kind of technological pushing at that time. They did a lot of incredible things, as you know, but in terms of space flight, there was a lot of doubt on McNamara's part whether they could match what NASA was doing. And at any rate, he didn't want to have two ponies in the same race. And Apollo was just devouring all the money.
Yeah.
Mole would have been, I think, 4 to 6 billion at the outside. Same as that Army moon base.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, sure. John.
Yeah, hey, Rod, good talk. I just want to make a comment. I was amused by the pictures and your discussion about von Braun's rocket. And didn't you say 1,000 flights a day or something?
No, I think it was supposed to be 5.
5 flights a day, and there was in the cutaway or the drawing, there was hydrazine and nitric acid. That'd be a good bit of pollution, I think.
Well, and you imagine, so they were looking at Christmas Island and Johnston Atoll. I've never been to Christmas, but I've been to Johnston Atoll, which is basically a rock the size of an aircraft carrier out in the Central Pacific. I mean, if anybody's ever been there, that's it. It's a landing strip and a shed. And the time I was there, they were using it to dispose of biological weapons, which made us all a little queasy getting off the plane. But he was going to be launching these things from there multiple times a day with these enormous stores of nitric acid and hydrazine. It's like, how do you do that safely? But I think the attitude, and I'm not accusing von Braun of this, but I think there was this kind of attitude, well, you know, it's a military operation, so there will be losses, and that's just what you have to do. But it would have been very edgy technology, I think. But he was ambitious. He did say at one point, I think it was for the Mars mission. So he had, if you remember at the end of that von Braun video clip I did, he has the big winged landers gliding on Mars, which of course would have gone straight down and exploded because the atmosphere was a lot thinner than we thought. But I think he estimated to have a fleet of 3 of those and 8 or 10 crew and cargo vessels would have required between 800 and 900 flights of his orbital shuttle. And he estimated that would cost the same as the Berlin airlift, which I think that's a little bit of that government contracting thing where you bid low and then hope they'll pay the difference later. But Leonard knows that stuff better than I ever will. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Sure.
On that note of pollution, it amazes me that with Project Orion that they were willing to detonate so many nuclear bombs in atmosphere without a thought. Well, I suppose in the end we did realize that was going to be bad, but
well, they're small nuclear bombs. I mean, they're only about 15 kilotons a piece, you know, or no, excuse me, I think 2 or 3. So they were small. I mean, this was also the era of the Ford Nucleon. Have any of you heard of the Ford Nucleon? It was looked kind of like a large T-bird with a lump in the back trunk where they had a small fission reactor. And everybody would be able to go out in the morning, draw their control rods out a few inches and drive their Ford Nucleon to work and hope that it didn't get in a wreck or malfunction. I read somewhere that they thought they had a way to keep it from going critical, but this is, you know, fissile material. You know, this could be a very unfortunate thing. So they had that. Of course, the Russians were launching nuclear-powered satellites at that point. We had shortly after that used plutonium fuel pellets, not in a fission reaction, but as a radioisotope thermoelectric generator on the Viking. So, yeah, there was a certain tolerance for it, but probably not enough. But boy, I mean, for those of us who wanted to go see a big rocket launch, can you imagine seeing something that ate up a couple hundred atomic bombs going up to orbit? That would have been pretty spectacular.
You know, the Orion concept was still being proposed by Edward Teller and Lowell Wood in the early 1990s. I mean, they didn't give up on that.
And it's still being studied, actually. There was a group out of Europe, I think 2 years ago, and the studies always, you know, they're variations on the same theme, which is, okay, we're looking at this in a different way, and no, we don't want to detonate them on Earth. We'll have to get all this stuff out into space or source the fissile elements in space. But the one thing that they all have come to in a conclusion so far is there are no showstoppers in the technology. With the right kind of ablative materials on the pusher plate and a lot of other things that you have to be concerned about, they'll work. Just have to have the willpower to build them. But the last I heard about atomic rockets is probably most of you have read also, is that we're back to basically the nuclear thermal propulsion that we were looking at in the 60s, which was not the snap reactor. It was NERVA, the NERVA engine, which was actually run for, I think, a couple of hours up in Jackass Flats in Nevada. By the early 70s, we had that knocked, and we could have had nuclear thermal going, zipping around the solar system at many times the speed of a chemical rocket. But NASA lost its funding and the government lost its moxie, and for a variety of reasons they decided just to go back to the shuttle, and nuclear rockets were not to be. But now we're looking at them again, so I hold great hope there. Looks like that might be it. Oh, here's yeah, there's the nucleon in the chat if anybody wants to see it. It's pretty funny. Barb, you're cutting out again.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention that I know Leonard's written articles about this, that pulsing kind of little thing that they were trying to, with the nukes. What was the name of the guy who did that?
Lake
Marabou did some experiments using lasers. You know about that?
Are you talking about recently or back in the day?
Well, no, about 10 years ago.
Yeah, he was out at.
Oh yeah. There's video of that. The little cone-shaped disc, right?
Yeah, but he was exploding air underneath the little hubcap looking spaceship. And got up. His whole goal was to fly to a greater height than Robert Goddard did back in the 30s, and he did it. And he was successful, and he kind of, I think there's a lot of classified things with high-powered lasers out there that, he could have done more, but I think, I don't know, some of the work got classified, but, he actually proved what he wanted to do.
Wow.
It was a great, we went out there a couple times, and he was pretty open to talking about where he could take this in the future. And, but again, I think one thing that comes out when I listen to your talk, which I really liked, it's just that we've gone through so much. And I think the thing that makes me wonder is whether we're going to see this repetition, of things, because I don't see much changing. The country's going to be broke here. It's already broke. And, how many of these programs we're going to, we'll have Rod Pyle 2 go, about 20 years from now and talk about all the things that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And what's the constancy of purpose, or as I think is the constipation of purpose? I just don't know how many of these things we're really going to see. I like, I do like, Elon Musk attempting what he's trying to do there. Unfortunately, I also think we've got a little bit of a Pied Piper mentality with him, and we'll see how well he does. One hopes he succeeds, but we've got a ways to go there. Anyway.
Well, and there's recently been some discussion in a certain space group that I know of about, should we be publicly supportive of SLS or not? And of course, Leonard, you were a part of that bunch for a long time, so you know how those conversations go. There's good reasons for either direction, but one thing I pointed out that got some head scratching was, Musk and or Bezos could wake up tomorrow morning and say, this rocket stuff is not a good way to make money. I'm tired of spending money on this. Or Musk could have a heart attack or be medically incapacitated, and or the company could go public, and or you get a board in there. They're not going to do this kind of stuff with their money and their shareholders' money. So as much as SLS bugs me in terms of the way the contracts worked, and I think Boeing has not been, quite on top of the game as much as they should have been to make that thing work, it might end up being the only option for a while. And I hate to see us go back to zero like we did when the shuttle was shut down. So I agree with you entirely. And how much of this can we do at a time of great financial distress? I don't know. I'm very surprised we got through a transition, a presidential party transition without having the whole Artemis program canceled outright.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Haven't gotten there yet.
We haven't
maybe.
gotten there yet, but we'll see.
Well, so Leonard, what do you think about the good senators, the NASA chief?
I don't have any problem with it. I've seen that guy when I lived in Washington, D.C., as far as Bill Nelson. I mean, he showed up at different kind of meetings at NASA, safety meetings, and he was certainly there. He wasn't talking, he was learning. I never had any problem with him, and I think I was a little surprised that the last guy, Bridenstine, kind of gave him a thumbs up, and said, hey, you guys in the Senate, try to get this guy confirmed. I think he's the right guy for this. And he may be. And what's the rumor about second in command? We may have
Sam Milroy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Astronaut, second in command at NASA. So we'll see how that goes.
I mean, I personally really like the idea of having politicians at the helm, because when you put an astronaut there, I think they're kind of lost in DC. I mean, one big reason a lot of people think Apollo got through the grinder, besides having a martyred president and all that, was Jim Webb, who was a bare knuckle politician and a fighter along with Johnson. But, if nothing else, Nelson certainly knows politics, and I'm sure he knows where enough skeletons are buried and which closets they're in to be able to get stuff done. And I think that can be pretty useful when you're trying to keep a space program moving, as opposed to having, as romanticized as astronauts are for us, they'd always make the greatest administrators.
And I do think, with China coming on board with their own space station and working out deals with Russia for lunar bases, and kind of have some political capital up in the hill there. They can't be that deaf. You're going to relinquish any kind of legacy of American space program and let China and Russia do their thing up there. But we'll see. It'll all play out. And there'll be a lot more books written. You'll be doing.
Yeah, I think we're both going to have to update our last couple of books, huh?
Anybody else got anything?
Any more questions for Rod? Or Leonard? Or Tom?
I think
Or
I burned everybody out.
No. That's great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It was great fun. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome anytime. We do this once a month.
Great. Are you guys looking for speakers all the time?
Yes.
We've got some in mind, but yeah, if you have any recommendations, please let us know.
Can't hear you, Mark.
Yeah, you're cutting out again. Leonard, are you pals with Frank White, I assume?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Have you had him yet?
No, we haven't. Overview Effect.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The Overview
Explain
Effect.
what
He's
it is.
got quite a lot going on now, and
Yeah.
that's always an interesting talk. That's probably a good idea. Frank is
Explain what it is.
well, Frank, it's one of those, any book writer or writer wants to, have a slogan that sticks out there and survives. And Frank came up with this overview effect of astronauts, looking back at Earth and having a different kind of appreciation for the planet. But he dubbed it the overview effect and wrote a good book, and that caught on. It's just something that, astronauts use it today.
Well, he did this in the 1980s. Like he wrote that book in
That's
80.
right. You did,
or
John. Didn't you do a lecture on that, or you were part of a program?
It's been a focus of the master's program that I've been in. And it's something I've been pursuing, and I've wondered if we shouldn't have Frank. So it's a good suggestion, Rod.
Yeah, and he's a really nice guy, and he does this all the time. He teaches at Harvard Extension, and he teaches at Kepler Space Institute and a bunch of other stuff. So I think he'd be a lot of fun. I'm trying to find. I mean, I love what he does. The overview effect. It's as Leonard says. It's kind of, we all look for that marketing hook we can hang our hat on for the next 30 years. And Frank's been very successful at that. Unfortunately, I haven't, at least not like that. But I'm going to post the text in the chat here. Here it is. My favorite overview effect quote from Edgar Mitchell, which I'm sure Leonard's seen, which reads, "You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck, drag him 250,000 miles out, and say, 'Look at that, you son of a bitch.'" Apollo 14 astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I sent that to John. I meant to send it to everybody. Oh, shoot, bad me.
That quote's in the Edgar Mitchell's book, The Way of the Explorer, and even before Frank White was doing his thing, Edgar Mitchell was doing something similar, and he had an institute. I don't know if it's still around or not. I can't remember the name.
It is called the Noetics Institute.
Right, and boy, they get into some interesting spaces with.
Yeah. I mean, he was trying, as most of you probably know, he was trying psychic experiments on the way back from the moon, which NASA frowned upon once they found out. But, bravo for the guy for being the ultimate explorer. I mean, why not? If it's a possibility, the shot. Towards the very end of his life, he started, I don't remember if he was on Coast to Coast AM or one of those shows, but he was talking about UFOs and, kind of moving towards that they walk among us thing. And we do hear that from various people, including, I think, wasn't Leonard, the former head of the Israeli space program, came out recently and said, "Yeah, the aliens are here. Trump just doesn't want to tell you." And I thought, what? So it's an interesting time for pretty soon that all these universities will have a new degree called alien studies or something. That'll be fun.
And I wanted to mention Resident Alien, a series that's on the Sci-Fi Channel. Oh. And it's really fun. It's funny, and it's, an alien that comes actually to Colorado, fictitiously, of course, and assumes a human body. And it's really fun. We've enjoyed it. It's on Wednesday nights, but you want to go back to the very first to see the first one. I think there are 7 or so far. Yeah, it's a good one.
I think the thing about the overview effect that's always fascinating with me is, I've been lucky to talk to a bunch of astronauts, and it does vary. Some of them are philosophical. Some of them, I have my flight checklist and I did it in 5 minutes instead of 10. And, some of them don't have, any kind of universal, kind of one-on-one with the universe or something. Right. So it does vary. You really get the test pilot out there, and they just want to make sure they don't screw up, and then they're lucky to look at the Earth or something.
Did you ever interview John Young?
Yeah, I talked to him. I did some little vignettes with him. Yeah.
My understanding was he was pretty. He was parsimonious with his words most of the time.
He would. Clark Chapman would know about Young. I think John Young in the astronaut corps was very much worried about. Volcanoes and also impactors. I mean, he would get into a good few minutes on that from his view. And anyway, Yeah.
Another, he's not going to speak to our group, I don't think, but in that vein that Mitchell and Frank White is Ron Garan, who's a shuttle astronaut, has been making inroads into that area with something he calls the orbital perspective. And there's also, I think it was on Netflix, it might have been Amazon, had the orbital, I mean, sorry, the overview effect. The group that Frank White's with has put a movie out that's,
Right.
you know, has some interviews, lots of visual, stunning visual from the shuttle and the International Space Station. So check that out too, if you're interested. And then we can maybe work on getting Frank.
Would have made a good IMAX movie.
Oh, it definitely would have.
Yeah. If IMAX is everything after COVID, I suppose, and we'll have to see.
Well, they need to.
Let me ask Clark Chapman something. Right? You know, he monitored better than I did, I think, the Lunar Planetary Science Conference last week, and that thing went on and on. Anything show up in the papers, Clark, that you found interesting or controversial or verifying?
Well, you only do periscope view. You know, there's 5 simultaneous sessions, and it's a little difficult. I was hoping there'd be some preliminary results from the return samples from the moon and from the asteroids, but not yet. They were just talking about what they're planning to do with the samples. And there were, of course, the very nice pictures of Mars from Perseverance, but at least what I looked in on was nothing very, very special. Took a whole week.
Oh, no.
Zooming for a week.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah, this is a conference, the Lunar and Planetary Science Conference that Clark and Y and Leonard and I, and I'm just trying to think if anyone else on here has been to that, but Bob Grimm has been there.
Gave papers.
Yeah, we've
Clark's given papers.
And but it's a 5-day conference that is in the Woodlands north of Houston, and amazing. Just like Clark said, 5 different sessions at once. There's the Mars room, moon room, and then a lot of fun in the bars and restaurants afterwards too.
Not this year.
So we didn't get that. We didn't get
that's
that.
the part we're missing.
Really.
Yeah, these started out as the Apollo science conferences, back in the early 70s, and they continue, and there's a lot happening with robotic probes to the planets and still telescopic observation. The sad session I went to was the Arecibo legacy session, where sort of the last observations in the first half of last year were being reported and all, but of course Arecibo is no more.
But it sounds like they're going to be considering bringing, it sounds like they're considering restoring it, I guess you'd say.
Well, yeah, the people in Puerto Rico, of course, it's a big loss of jobs and a cultural icon and so on. So they'd like to rebuild Arecibo or maybe put in some new kind of equivalent instrument. But, there's all ideas involving Green Bank but there's a process that's starting in a week or two to have various studies done and committees meet and discussions about how to keep planetary radar going in the future, but it'll be a while.
Clark, at that conference, was there any mention of a more firm date for Mars sample return, or is it still out in that 2020X range?
Yeah, I didn't hear anything very specific. I mean, I think they're hoping that it'll happen sooner rather than later, but
Yeah.
You know, they're going to cache the samples that Perseverance will gather and hope that something comes along in a decade or so to pick them up
Yeah.
and return them.
Well, maybe if we're lucky, Elon will get there first and just stroll over and stick them in this pocket. Not holding my breath, but that'd be kind of fun.
So one thing I wanted to ask Jan, I tried earlier, just for us local people here.
You're
can you
faded
hear me,
again,
Jan? Okay, can you hear me, Jan? When are those bears coming out?
They're here.
Here she comes.
Let's see if I can be unmuted here. Can you hear me?
Hear you. Yes.
We never know. I think we should be ready about April 15th. We used to say April 26th, but now we've had bears last year appearing on April, earlier in April. So mostly to get that suet down before they get here. They smell it so much more than they do bird seeds. Just let me know.
Yeah, Jan, so for those of you who don't know, you know, Jan writes an article in our local monthly publication, the Mountain Messenger, which we truly appreciate, their editor, covering our meetings. But yeah, you're supposed to report any bear sightings and I guess any wild animals. Jan, you cover that part, right? And then there's a guy who covers the birds.
Right. There's a gal that covers the birds, and I'm glad she's doing that now. This month, when you get your Mountain Messenger, we have a porcupine report.
Hi. That's a first.
Where was that?
Actually, it's was from Terminal 19, and it was actually from some time ago, but Adam Jack just downloaded his trail cam and found here 3 pictures of the porcupine. Much fun. And the only other one that we've had that I know of in the canyon, Adam Jack was the one that saw it also at Butte Drive and Crescent Park Drive.
Wow.
People just have to watch their dogs if we have more porcupines.
Along with the skunks, right?
Oh God.
You don't have those on your boat, Rod.
Oh, but we have them in Southern California, and a few years ago, well, probably more like 15 years ago. Forget that when you start to get to be our age, and they all get compressed together. But my dog came across a skunk, and I remember that tomato juice was the recommended therapy, but we didn't have any. So I'm desperately scrambling out of the kitchen. And I mean, you know, if you've been near a skunk strike before, it's not just the smell, you taste it. You know, it's that bad, and your eyes are burning and all that. So I've got this poor shivering dog in there wailing because he doesn't know what to do. And I finally found we had 3 bottles of Prego spaghetti sauce that had sausage and onions and everything else. And so I used it to douse this poor dog, and it helped the smell, but he looked like Cujo, and he looked like something out of a monster movie, you know, little bits of meat hanging off his face and a vegetable, an onion over here. And it was not fun.
So, Rod, what kind of boat is that you're on? Is it a motorboat or a sailboat?
It's a 42-foot power cruiser from the 70s.
Okay.
It's a company called Pacemaker that didn't make very many boats, but it basically looked like a Chris Craft. So it's about, I think I measured it out. It's about 500 square feet if you include the outer deck. I've had smaller apartments. So, you know, it's not a bad way to live. And
so you mainly went there to isolate, right, from the coronavirus, but are you planning to stay there then once you
I got my shot. I'll be moving back to LA, but I have to admit there's a part of me that's kind of likes it down here, more than I expected. But yeah, I'll be moving back up there in probably about a month. Got to get our shots. LA was just out of control, though. You know, Southern California just become, at one point, I think it was one of the most highly infected, well, certainly in the country, if not in the Western Hemisphere. Which is funny because everybody thought, oh, the slums of Asia and places like that are going to be worse, but Southern California was just on fire. So, and I wanted a boat. And I got a decent royalty check for the first time in 10 years. So there's a combination for you.
Great. On which book was that?
Oh, Apollo, of course. And I have Buzz to thank for that. They weren't looking for me as an author. They were looking for his forward. But as Leonard probably knows, if Buzz writes you a forward, the book comes up as co-authored by, and happy days. Yeah.
Well, if anyone, yeah, we haven't had dinner yet, so we might be into getting to that.
You're in overtime here.
Yeah, no, well, this was perfect. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed this. Yeah. Even
I'll
if
see
you
you
can't
next
hear
time.
us. Yeah, yeah. And if you make it out to Colorado, definitely come see us and maybe it'd be around a time we have a meeting in person. We're hoping to do that
That'd be fun.
eventually. Yeah.
And you live near Boulder, right?
We're all of us who are up here in the mountains are pretty much at 9,000 feet, and we're about an hour from Denver, or an hour from the Denver.
Can't hear you, Barb. Can't hear you.
We're about an hour from the Denver airport, west, and so we're about halfway between Golden and Boulder, and then 10 miles up in the mountains.
That sounds like fun. Well, I got some pent up travel money and desire, so be careful. I may show up. But I promise not to wake you up at 3 a.m. like Buzz did, Leonard.
Yeah, that would be bad.
He did.
You'll have plenty of places to stay or visit while you're up here.
Awesome. I haven't been there since I was in my 20s, so I'm sure it's changed.
A little bit.
Yeah, we've got a lot of telescopes with our group. John,
Barb, you got to get a microphone.
Okay, sorry about that. You can hear Leonard okay, though, right?
I think it's your voice.
Yeah.
I think we need to buy her a microphone.
Here, get one of these.
We've got one, don't we?
You got one right there.
They're $100, and they're great, and they plug right in the computer. You don't need any converters or anything.
Okay, and we probably have one around here we could plug in. Okay.
Probably where a fire extinguisher is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
All right.
Thanks so much, Rod.
Thank
we
you.
really appreciate this. This was and so different than we've covered a lot of different topics, but this was so different. I really was hoping you'd agree to do this one.
That's funny. People always tell me I'm different. I guess that's a good thing. That talk was different. No, I'm kidding. All right. Thanks again. I hope I see you soon.
Yeah. Hope to see you soon.
That'd be great.
Okay.
And I hope I meet you other folks in person. That would be fun.
Yeah. It's a great group. It's our family for Leonard and I. Hope
All righty. Take care.
Care.
See you later, Rod.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, if you need to go, Barb, I can end this anytime and it'll.
Yeah. Or we can leave it on if actually we lost. No, George is still there. We lost Judy. I know usually sometimes we stay later and talk a bit. I don't know. Maybe I could talk longer. Leonard went to go make dinner. So
Well, then I will make you.
you want to make me the host?
Hey, John, before you go, what's happening with the sun recently?
What's happening with what? The sun. Oh, John.
Well, we've moved into the next solar cycle, so we've had more sunspots, and actually there was a big geomagnetic storm that hit Earth the other day, and they saw aurora in northern Minnesota, which is pretty amazing. So, and it was the curtain aurora, so it's not just the glow, the red glow on the horizon. It was actually aurora, the moving curtain type stuff. So yeah, that's what's going on. And it'll just keep getting more and more active for the next 5 years.
That was pretty good, John. Our daughter in Alaska was watching it and it was moving around. Our friend in Montana was watching it move around. We were watching the Iditarod live feeds, and you could see it on the cameras there in Alaska on the Iditarod, and we were all kind of talking to each other, both on the phone and on the internet. And then it was really a good show. We wished it would come down here.
Well, I can, the next time there is a possibility, we can put out an alert. There hasn't been one in a while this far south. There was talk a couple months ago of one that might have been visible from Wyoming. I put a camera out hoping that I could see something on the horizon towards that direction. I got nothing. The digital cameras are so sensitive that they might be able to pick stuff up like that.
Yeah. And in the red, if you have a red sensitive one, you can, it should be able to see red fainter than the eye can see it anyway.
Mhm.
The magnetic pole has moved north towards Siberia in the last, I don't know, 30 years. So we don't see as many down here as we used to.
But I'll let y'all know. Or you can subscribe to spaceweather.com is a good one. NOAA, the Space Weather Prediction Center, if you go to their website, they've got email alerts that they'll send out to you as well. That's how I knew about the geomagnetic storm that was going to hit. So I'm going to leave you guys. Barb's the host now, but it's good seeing y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much, John.
Seeing you, everybody.
And I apologize for the PowerPoint problems tonight. That was just so strange.
Reminds me of the old days in high school where they have to grab you're seeing a film in your high school class, and it keeps going like Argentina. You can hardly understand it, and they get the guy from the AV club to come in and straighten out the projector for you. So every era has its technological issues.
Yeah.
I was just thinking it's a good thing we weren't going to land on the moon with our technology tonight.
Oh, we would have figured it out.
So, John, do you want to save that, what you have till next time? Because it'd be good to share with the whole group.
I haven't deleted it. I can share it next time. Or maybe I'll have something more. Or John will have something. Or Dave. Or Judy.
Need some good weather.
Man, I tell you, that's for sure.
Well,
John A,
it's going to snow every day this week.
Yep.
How much?
We're supposed to get more than a foot tonight, or in addition to what we've gotten already.
Yeah.
All right. See y'all. Thanks.
Good night.
So John, our other John A, as far as, are you, like, if it had been clear tonight, would you have set up your telescope or?
Yeah, I could have done that. I just knew that from several days ago that it wasn't going to happen.
Because I was thinking about you. Wondering.
I took my mount completely apart and re-lubed it, and I'm more experienced with the video feed, the live feed. So yeah, it would be a good thing. But yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Let's see what else is going on. I don't.
Who is Eleanor?
I can't hear you.
I'm wondering who Eleanor is. Do we know?
Oh, I don't know.
Or whether she wants to say anything? But yeah, we had 30 people, so that's a pretty good turnout.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, I got my first vaccine since I talked to you last.
Really? When did you get it?
On the 4th.
Yeah. So you go back around the 4th. Which one did you get?
It's hard hearing you.
Which one did you get? Pfizer or
Moderna.
Moderna? Yeah, we got
Yeah.
Moderna too. Yeah. And so
And
any
I felt
reaction?
my arm was sore and I was tired for a couple days.
Yeah, so it is weird how different people have different reactions. You know, our first one, Leonard didn't even have a sore arm, and mine was a little sore, but they tell you to move your arm around, you know, to
Yeah.
whichever one gets shot to get it out of that arm, and it'll be less sore. But yeah, the second one that next day, we felt really bad, well, pretty bad. We were achy and kind of flu-like, but it was just that one day, and then by the next day we were good.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well,
So
I'm
we hit our
getting
2
my
weeks.
Pardon?
Yeah. We hit our 2 weeks after that second shot last Monday. So
Oh,
we
good
were
for
out
you.
shoveling snow, to celebrate.
I shovel plenty. Yeah, I won't get there till the middle of April, so just is what it is.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good we're getting him. Okay, you
Yeah.
guys. Well,
All right.
we'll go eat. Love you all. Yeah, and I think you enjoyed that talk then, right?
It was fun, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you maybe knew a lot of that stuff.
I think he's Facebook friends with someone I'm Facebook friends with.
Yeah, probably because he's National Space Society.
Okay.
Okay,
Night night.
guys. Good night. See you next time.